Okay. The appeal to nature fallacy is a concept that gets kicked around a lot on the internet. Perhaps especially amongst people interested in veganism, ecology, and animal rights. As with many other phrases that end with the word fallacy, it gets repeated so often that people forget that the concept itself is not always fallacious. An ad hominem fallacy, a Latin term meaning fallacy of speaking against the person instead of against their ideas. Not all ad hominem information is fallacious. You may have an argument against a person about their character, about their conduct, what they've done in life, which is completely valid and salient and important to the conversation you're having. If you're having an election and you're debating who should people vote for, ad hominem material may be really useful and salient and important, and not a fallacy at all. It may not be raised in a fallacious way. Likewise, this question of nature, invoking the idea of nature or the observation of the natural world as a standard, as a referent, is not always fallacious by any means. If you have a captive breeding program for endangered bird species, so you have birds where there are so few of them left that if you just leave them in the forest, you're afraid they're going to disappear, or it may be that there's so little forest left, the type of habitat they're from has disappeared, that you're taking them in and you're going to try to build an enclosure for them. How would you design that enclosure to be humane? Strange word. To be appropriate for those birds. Well, a study of their natural habitat is the way to do it. To say these birds will be more comfortable in an enclosure that resembles their natural origins is not an appeal to nature fallacy. It's completely procedurally correct. You're interested in the temperature, the climate, how much water they'd be exposed to. Are they a type of bird that likes to be next to a pond? What type of vegetation? What type of trees? Yes, you would gather assiduously information about the natural world and put together a model for what type of environment they should live in if you're going to keep these birds in captivity temporarily or permanently for this type of reason. So no, not every use of the concept of nature is a fallacy. And I mean, I don't know, it's funny to me. Vegans have gotten into this habit of anytime someone says to you that eating meat is natural, just throwing back this idea, well, that's an appeal to nature fallacy. You can reflect in your own lives whether or not that has ever really been effective for you. If you're talking to someone, maybe your boss at work, maybe your boyfriend, maybe your girlfriend, maybe your brother, I really doubt that this will get a positive reaction or move the conversation forward in an effective way. To simply snub someone by saying, oh no, that's an appeal to nature fallacy. Even if it really is an appeal to nature fallacy, it may be that they're engaging in fallacious reasoning and appealing, to nature as a standard when it's not appropriate. But I have now had all of the same excuses from vegans that meat eaters make for eating meat when vegans want to make excuses for buying a dog and cutting off its testicles and then raising it as a house pet, where they think the way the dog lives in nature is irrelevant, and therefore I'm supposedly guilty of committing an appeal to nature fallacy by just talking about how dogs actually live in nature. For example, the African wild dog. My pointing out that pigs in the wild do not behave like these pigs people are now raising as house pets. And there were similar issues. Are you going to spay and neuter the pig? Are you going to remove the pig's fangs? This pig is presumably not going to be allowed to grow tusks and is not going to be allowed to go hunting. Say wild boars actually kill and eat other large mammals. You're not going to let the pig kill and eat your dog, as an example, which they're quite capable of doing. There are so many absurd contradictions in this. And people talk about a real fallacy. People also send in the excuse to me of symbiosis, of claiming that their relationship with their house pet is one of symbiosis. I'm not going to get into the scientific definition of symbiosis. Okay, you think taking an animal and castrating it so that it can entertain you, so that it can be your companion and have an emotional, you think that's symbiosis? You look at symbiosis in nature. You think it's reasonable to extend the concept of symbiosis to a human being spaying or neutering a house pet, depriving it of its natural environment, depriving it of its autonomy in every way, and turning it into a toy, into play? You regard that as symbiosis? Well, which one is a worse fallacy? When I am appealing to nature in that discussion, I'm appealing to the concept of nature in exactly the same way that we would in designing habitat for birds in a bird enclosure, or for penguins, say in a penguin enclosure. You may indeed have a situation where a specific breed of penguin, it's going to die, or it's been displaced. You need to provide shelter to keep them alive, either before they can be returned to their habitat or for some other reason. Obviously, you're going to want to really carefully study what is the diet of the penguins in nature, what temperature would they be at, how can you provide them with enough time on land, enough time in the water, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, so no, not every use of the idea is fallacious. Parallel to this also, I mean, there is the appeal to culture fallacy, more often called the appeal to tradition, which comes up a lot in my life, where people make excuses for things because something is cultural or traditional. Well, sometimes that may be fallacious. And again, when you're talking to people face to face, whether it's your brother, your boss, or what have you, it's probably not useful to say to them, oh, well, that's an appeal to culture fallacy. Where is that going to take the conversation? And why would they respect your opinion? And why would that be convincing? I think this is probably more counterproductive than people want to think it is. But the appeal to culture also, it's not always a fallacy. If we're discussing the best way to organize an art museum, culture is significant. Culture is relevant. Culture is a meaningful standard or criteria. Tradition is relevant. There are all sorts of organizing a performance of Shakespeare, whatever. Culture and tradition and all those ideas. You want to talk about religion or religion and politics. There are all sorts of contexts where it's not fallacious to appeal to these ideas as a standard. And finally, I mean, probably the most overused fallacy of them all on the internet is this idea that causation is not proved by correlation. Sorry, we normally said the other way around, that correlation doesn't show causation. And there it's like, well, this is true, and some people seem to feel very intelligent and powerful by leaping out to declare that this is true, that correlation is not the same thing as causation. But this tends to be a sort of meaningless distraction from the fact that correlation itself is very meaningful and very important. Long ago, before I left Toronto, we had a scandal covered in the newspapers about the correlation between ethnicity and different types of police arrests. And right away, looking at the statistics, you could see there was a very unequal treatment of black people. And this was actually not downtown Toronto. This was really the suburbs of Toronto, and especially the highways that connected the suburbs. So it was the police were stopping, like one especially disproportionate example was the police stopping cars with black drivers and checking to see if the car was stolen, where there was no other reason to do so. Now, correlation does not prove causation, but it's still incredibly important. It's true, you don't have a cause and effect relationship there between ethnicity and police behavior, but it doesn't matter. The correlation already is really important. It's something you really need to address. The inequality between the races shown by this correlation is already something really meaningful and important, and we don't even actually need to get into other causal factors, although there may be some. It may be that when you really look at it, well, 10% of these cases were for this reason and 5% were for that reason. It's never going to be 100% racism. But obviously, as I say, the correlation already is so significant. So likewise, we're talking about appeal to nature. Well, sometimes nature really is significant. Can I keep a pet penguin? No. Can I keep a pet flamingo, a pink flamingo? No. I think if you really search your heart of hearts as a vegan and you look at how dogs live in the wild, how pigs live in the wild, what the life of a wild boar is like in the forest, then you may be surprised to find that the answer to the question, can you keep a pig as a pet, actually is no. Even though the life of a pig in your living room as a pet is much more pleasant than the life of a pig in a slaughterhouse or on a farm, I understand that. Same for dogs. Raising dogs as pets is obviously nicer to the dogs than raising them for meat, but that is ultimately a meaningless comparison. The comparison I want you to make, that we all should make, is the comparison to how animals live in the wild. Finally, one more example I wanted to mention on this issue of correlation versus causation. Every so often I see social statistics of this kind really misunderstood, where there's a correlation between art education, students who are schooled in painting, and then how much money they earn after they graduate, or how successful they are in university, or other factors. That's a case where many people really do misunderstand. They think, oh, if you teach students how to draw and paint, it will make them smarter, and then they'll be better at math for that reason, for cause and effect reasons. Now, of course, in reality, if you understand social science statistics, the type of students who have access to art education have all kinds of other social advantages, and the students who are deprived of art education have other disadvantages, and so on. There are all these other conflating factors. Now, nevertheless, the correlation may still be meaningful. It may still be worth really thinking about what ways learning or studying art makes students maybe more motivated to do better at math. Maybe it's just a nice distraction. Maybe students do better at math because their education as a whole is less boring, or more rewarding, or they're happier overall or something. But when you have a correlation like that, students getting art education do better at math, then no, we definitely do not want to talk about correlation equating to causation, but we still can recognize the correlation itself as something meaningful. So guys, we've all been kicking around this concept of the appeal to nature fallacy a little bit too much. Some voices on YouTube in particular have really popularized this as a kind of fast, kick-in-the-pants refutation for meat eaters, which is really kind of shallow and stupid and self-defeating, as opposed to having a more meaningful engagement with the people you're debating these issues about, and being open to really understanding what their misconceptions are and trying to educate them. It works both ways too, right? Because if vegans, people say to us that eating meat is natural, and we say, no, that's an appeal to nature fallacy. Well, we say a human being drinking a cow's milk is unnatural. Well, then the meat eaters can say to us, that's an appeal to nature fallacy. Is it a fallacy? I think it's really meaningful and worthwhile to say, look, in nature, mammals feed milk to their own babies. Only. Like a cow feeds a baby calf, and humans feed milk to baby humans, and that's it. And it's not part of adult nutrition for really any mammal species. Dolphins do breastfeeding too, but human beings do not try to drink dolphin milk. Do not Google that. Do not Google that. So yeah, talking about what's natural and what's unnatural is not always fallacy, is not always a logical dead end. It doesn't mean you're stupid. It doesn't mean you're asking the wrong questions. All of these questions are worth exploring with a detached, down-to-earth, ultimately open-minded attitude that's informed by the facts, and that's also, honest about the extent to which our own emotions are involved in this. Because these decisions are not purely factual. Ultimately, the sense of revulsion I have for the dairy industry, it's partly emotional, it's partly irrational, it's partly ecological, it's partly economic, but we all know it really comes down to a question of principle. At the end of the day, it begins with ethics, it ends with ethics, and most of what's going on in the middle is about ethics. So whether or not you think the role of nature is a fallacy, it comes down to questions of good and evil, and questions of good and evil will never be strictly logical. They'll be about me and you, what kind of man I want to be, what kind of society I want to live in, what kind of world I want this to be for myself and for my children in the future.